If a white police officer shot a black guy outside right now, all of you guys would be outside protesting right now. But yet you guys kill each other every single day and nobody says a word. Anytime I try to bridge divides, I always say, get away from everybody else and let's talk about you. I always try to make things more personable to that person's experience as opposed to operating in this vortex, which is what a lot of us are living in and we can't get out of. People take lives because of lack of respect. People will commit some of the most heinous crimes because of lack of respect. The only way we can save our country and our nation is we have to literally get back to just caring about each other and realizing that we all essentially want the same thing.
Remember, adversity is your advantage.
Hey friends, super pumped up to introduce today's guest, who is a new and a close friend of mine. His name is Ryan Tillman. And Ryan comes from Southern California, extremely impressive guy. We are kindred spirits, have so much in common. He is a leader, which I absolutely love. He's going to be dropping a ton of knowledge and a ton of value bombs from the conversation that we had. He's also a two-sport athlete, played D1 college football for the University of Nevada, Las Vegas, UNLV. Was a police officer here in Southern California, and now he's the CEO of Breaking Barriers United. And one thing I love about him from a leadership perspective, he is literally battling segregation, battling the division. He's uniting people, which is really the true essence of leadership. So we had an incredible action-packed conversation where he talked about leadership, he talked about transparency, and about courage. So there's so much to unpack here. Cannot wait for you to listen to the episode, so enjoy. Hey friends, welcome back to another amazing episode of the CEO Show with Bryce Henson, a show that's dedicated to teach leadership, promote capitalism, and defend free speech. We got a fire episode today teaching law enforcement, leadership, and transparency. My man Ryan, welcome to the show.
My guy Bryce, man, thanks for having me, man. This is a long time coming. I couldn't sleep last night. I was like, oh man, I get to be on my man's show tomorrow.
Dude, man, well, I'm super pumped. Like to your point, but looking forward to this for a while. I had to do a couple of rescheduling, but
yeah, no worries.
Introduced to our man B, and we're here at our studio in Chino Hills, the greater LA area, and we're going to inspire some people today.
Let's do it, man. Let's do it. Let's talk it. Let's get into it.
Well, man, I am so inspired by you. I feel like at a time where our world is divided, there's so much segregation. I just love your mission of bringing people together. Your consulting firm we'll talk about. So I have a lot of respect for that. And you are a true leader, man.
I appreciate that.
And I'm a student of leadership. A pillar of this show is to teach leadership. So we're going to talk a lot about that today.
You got it, man. Let's do it.
All right, brother. So law enforcement, this is your background. So give us the backstory of your journey in law enforcement. How did that come to be? And really what initially motivated you to get in the field?
Yeah, it's so funny because law enforcement is one of those things where I least expected would have been my field. Like growing up, I didn't like cops. I had some bad experiences with cops. My family had bad experiences with cops. And so if you would have talked to the 21-year-old Ryan and asked the 20-year-old Ryan, what is he going to do for a living? He would have told you, oh, he's going to be a Fortune 500 CEO. He's going to have some type of tech company, and he's going to ride off into the sunset. Like that was my aspirations coming out of college. And when I got out of college, I got married to my beautiful wife at the time, Kimberly. She was working full time at a grocery store chain, and I was selling insurance for Primerica and working at Abercrombie & Fitch as an assistant manager. And I hated my life. I hated going to work at Abercrombie & Fitch because I feel like I got poisoned every time by the freaking cologne. And then I hated selling the insurance. I did very well selling the insurance, but I mean, anybody that's ever done direct sales, especially like at a multi-level marketing company, it's a drag. And so, but I learned a lot of good lessons. So when my wife and I were married, she got pregnant after our first year of marriage. And I was like, man, like, this isn't sustainable. Like, I can't keep staying with the hustle of working in insurance like that. And so my dad's best friend at the time was like, hey, you should go into law enforcement. And I was like, man, I'm not about to be working for the man. I'm not about to be a pig. Like, that was legitimately like my mentality at the time. And so after praying about it, I asked God, I said, God, what do you want me to do? If you want me to go through this door, open the door. If you're not, close the door. So after doing that, man, like the doors just kind of flew off the hinges. Like, usually it's pretty difficult to get hired in law enforcement, but the doors, like I walked in with ease. I was in the process with Orange County Sheriff's Department, Chino Police Department, who hired me, and a couple other agencies. And it got to the point where they were like, hey, what do we have to do to get you to come work here? And I was like, well, shoot, give me a freaking job. Like, I'll come work here tomorrow. And so Chino Police Department ended up hiring me. I went through the academy. And I remember going to the academy. I was like, man, I still don't know if this is what I want to do. Like, I just feel like I'm a sellout. I feel like the people in my culture are not going to like really like me like that. So finally, I graduated the academy number 2 overall in my class. I missed number 1 by 0.04%. The reason I say that is because law enforcement just came natural to me. Like thinking on the move, utilizing common sense to decision make, like that just came natural. So I graduated pretty high, got out of the academy, came back, did my training here, and I still was like, man, I don't know if this is what I want to do. So that was right around the time that Michael Brown was killed in Ferguson, and the country went up in flames like it did for George Floyd. And I remember the feeling that I had. I was like, man, I don't like the way I feel right now. Like, as a black guy in law enforcement, my own people hate me. People in law enforcement don't understand why black people don't like law enforcement, so they don't get me. And I was in this weird place. Like, nobody really understood. So one morning, I remember waking up, and I remember God just put this vision on my mind, like, go and bridge the gap between law enforcement and the community. I was like, okay, well, what does that even look like? So
you literally God shot came down.
Yeah, literally like implanted. I even knew what the name of what it was going to be, Breaking Barriers United. I even knew what the name was going to be. It was crazy. So I got up and it was like almost like a savant. I opened my laptop and I just started creating this presentation, and it was like it was easy. It was effortless. So I came to the idea. I came to my chief with the idea at the time. And I was like, hey, I want to do an event in the city. I want to bring all these stakeholders together, and I want to talk to them about bridging this gap. So I did that, and it was a success. Like, I actually put civilians through scenarios on stage in front of everybody. And at the time, nobody was doing that. So I was putting them through scenarios. Everybody was having this eye-opening moment, these light bulb moments, like, wow, I never thought about it that way. And then that was the birth of Breaking Barriers United, because I started realizing, like, man, I can do this full time. And so
before you go any further, I just want to take a second to acknowledge you and why that's so powerful, because you are a true bred leader. In a time right now, there's so much divisiveness, so much segregation. What leaders do, in my experience, is they bring people together. They connect people. That is the essence of leadership. That's the essence of putting teams together, building businesses, and just being successful. And the fact that you had that vision, you executed on that vision, so much respect for that. So I just want to acknowledge that.
No, I appreciate that. And that is something to talk about too, because like a lot of people, they show up to their day job and it's about me. It's about numero uno. Like, what can I get? And I, for whatever reason, I think it's the way I was raised, or my mom and my dad. Like, they always raised me to think about other people. They always raised me to figure out like how you can make situations better. My grandfather, that we were talking about off camera, he would always say like, hey, when you walk into a room, after you walk out, that room should look better than what it was when you walked into it. And I always kept that in the back of my mind about everything I do. So even when it came to the profession, it's like, how am I going to make this profession better? I don't want to just be a regular cop, just go up, show up to my day job and leave. Like, how do I make it better? And that's kind of what forged, what I do today now full time, is trying to bridge divides. And it's not even exclusive to law enforcement anymore. It's just, how do I bridge divides with people in general? And that's kind of what my whole mission is now.
It's like leadership, bro. Leadership. Love it. One question I want to dig in a little bit, and talking about kind of in your mind when you're going through this kind of challenging situation. You're a black guy, your community doesn't like you. You're kind of like, in the police academy now, you're kind of going through internal turmoil. What would you say is probably the biggest misconception that you learned on the other side of getting in the force that you didn't really fully understand before you became a police officer?
Oh, that's easy, man. The what, the why, and the how. Prior to law enforcement, I just saw videos. Actually, I take that back. I had my own interactions that were kind of negative with law enforcement. So I had to put that on a different shelf, because that did contribute to the sensationalism that I felt towards law enforcement. But that wasn't why, in totality, why I felt that way. A lot of it was because of what I would see on TV and social media. So when I got into law enforcement, I got to understand the what, the why, and the how. The what of what officers do. What do we do? What's our job? Our job is to go out there, keep the peace, enforce laws, and making sure that we keep society peaceful. That's like the what, for the most part. The why. Why do we do that? Well, because there are very, very evil people out there that are preying upon innocent victims. And if you give them any type of any type of like if you give them an inch, they'll take a mile. So that's why we do it. And then how do we do it? Well, we do it by having training and learning tactics, learning how to talk to people, learning how to diffuse situations, learning how to what's the word for it? They always use it now. When people are de-escalate situations, like that's the how. So when I was able to fill in those gaps with the what, the why, and the how, it made the light bulb go off. I was like, wow, like I never understood it from that way. I never understood it from that perspective. And it brought context. And the reason why we miss the mark so much times in society now is because everything lacks context. We'll see a video and we'll run with that video feeling some type of way about it. But what you're not taking is the context. And so now, like a lot of my platform is devoted to sharing context of a lot of these sensationalized videos, which I just did one the other day about some guy that died in Atlanta.
So actually, I had this question since you brought it up. I'm going to dive in. How would you say, from your perspective, now with technology and body cams, on one hand, it provides a lot of visibility and transparency. Sometimes, to your point, there's not context. How do you think that's either hurt or helped both law enforcement, also society at large?
So I think it's helped tremendously. There were a lot of law enforcement agencies, including. So I kind of came in at a weird time. I came in at a time where they didn't have the body cams yet, but they were experimenting with them. So I did a little bit of policing without body cams. It was like we still had tape recorders, but by the time I was off of training, they had made the transition to body cams. So I got to see a little bit of both worlds. Since we've adopted body cams and all this filming, it's helped tremendously. There was a lot of officers that were always saying, oh no, like this is going to be terrible for the profession. We don't need this. Now people are they're going to want to see everything. And I would always say, like, well, if you're not doing anything wrong, you don't have anything to worry about. And that's still true. Like, as long as you're not doing anything that's corrupt, you don't have anything to worry about. So body cams have definitely helped more than they've hurt us, but they have hurt us in ways. And the reason they've hurt us is because nowadays, if it's not captured on body cam, then it never happened. Like it's created the reverse effect. If I don't see something that didn't happen on a body cam, but the officer said it happened, then we're more apt to rely on what we see on body cam than we are to rely on the officer's word. Which, if you ask me, the officer's word is the most important part because they were the ones in the situation. But if something didn't capture it, if your body camera wasn't on, if it malfunctioned, now everybody's going to look at you like a liar. So that's one way it's hurt. The other thing that body cams is hurt is that body cams can't tell the story of what you're feeling. So if I am driving to a call for service and, I'm already, let's just say I'm going to an active shooter and my nerves are up, I'm feeling nervous, all these things that are going on, body cams can't tell that story. Right. All you see is the way I react, but you don't realize the way I react is coming from a place of how I feel. So when you watch these videos, it lacks the context of the emotions that the officers are experiencing, which actually lead to the decisions of what they make. And that's where the report writing comes into play. So I think that is the negative effect of body cams, but by far, I wouldn't want to live in a society without them anymore because it's helped so many officers get off the hook more than it's hurt them.
Yeah, I love that. But I think also, true to your credit with breaking barriers, watching your content, you do a great job of doing like the breakdowns and all that. And I've learned a lot too, because I've never been in a police, chase, et cetera, but you'll break something down and then you also break it down like what the officer is thinking and feeling in that moment. And that's a big level of awareness that I think is just super impactful going back to just bridging the gap. And that's what you do really well.
Well, there's super minute details that you won't pick up on as the viewer, especially if you're not in law enforcement. The last video I posted it yesterday, a couple days ago. The guy walks into a bar. Guy has a gun at the bar. He's drinking alcohol. The owner of the bar calls and says, hey, look, this guy's sitting at the seat. He's being belligerent. He used to work here. We want him gone. They respond. They try to talk to this dude. He immediately tries to resist and flee. Right. And so as they go down to the ground, the guy grabs the gun on his hip, shoots a security guard in his shoulder, which you don't necessarily see.
I didn't see that.
Nobody
initially.
sees that.
Yeah, I didn't see that.
All you see is the responding officer, shoot like 9 times. He fires a first volley, which is like 5 times. Boom, 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 boom. And then like as he's getting ready to key up, he then fires another volley of rounds, another 5 or 6 shots. So it looks excessive. It looks terrible.
Totally.
But if you actually slow it and break it down, what you realize is that number one is the guy fired at the security guard, actually shooting him. So in slowing it down, you can see that.
But you don't see that in first look.
You don't see that in first look.
When I saw it, I was like, holy shit, that's super aggressive. And then when I listened to you break it down, then I was like, oh, shoot, he's right. Like, I looked at it from a completely different context than at face value.
Yeah, so that was number one. Number two is after he fires the first volley of shots, the 5 shots, he goes to get on his radio to tell his responding officers where they're at, where to come. But as he's going to key up, he drops the radio and then fires another volley of shots. Well, my training and experience tells me that he was still perceiving something as a threat even when that guy is on the ground, which is why he took his hand off his radio and went back to his firearm. You wouldn't know that if you were just watching this video at face value. You wouldn't think about that. So that tells me he still perceives a threat. And sure enough, we find out after the fact that the guy was still close to the gun. He was still moving towards the gun, which is why he followed up. And then one of the other details I picked up on was after this was all over, the officer that fires his weapon leaves the bar and he's like, yelling and cussing like, man, I didn't want this to happen. And then like he's drinking some water and you can see his hand shaking, drinking the water. Well, what does that tell you? That tells you that this officer had a lot of adrenaline going. He's having an adrenaline dump at this point in time. It wasn't like his mindset he wasn't outside or out there just to kill this guy. He was out there doing his job, but yet everybody is trying to portray him as being an executioner. So these are minute details that the general public doesn't see. And so one of the biggest things, the biggest gaps that I realized early on as an officer was if we want to bridge the gap, we have to be able to educate the community. And that's one of the marks that law enforcement has missed over the years is that we go out there, we handle business, we leave, and we don't tell people why we did what we did. And so if we're talking about leadership, leaders will see things that other people don't see. And I'm not trying to say I'm a good leader at all, but what I am saying is I've always tried to pride myself on seeing what other people don't see. Seeing the adversity that's coming up down the road that nobody's paying attention to. I have a good friend of mine named Gordon Graham. He would say, you have to look at the rhino that's coming right at you. Another example, another way to express it is, Gordon Graham gives another good example. He says, think about if you were to hear somebody at your police department right now got into a car accident, would you be able to picture or think about a few people that probably got in a car accident? And when you ask that question to officers, everybody will raise their hand. Like, yeah, I could probably think about 3 people that got in an accident. So then the follow-up question to that is, okay, well, why did you think about those 3 people? Well, because those 3 people that you thought of have shown tendencies of bad driving or aggressive driving. And so we know these people exist, but yet we don't do anything about it. So you as a leader have to be able to see things that are going to come and be able to respond to that so that way you could try to avoid those adversities.
Love that. Speaking of leadership and training, because whether it's in law enforcement, whether it's in the civilian world and business, which is I operate here, what sort of leadership training did you, receive? And I guess the law enforcement in general, I would love to kind of get some insights there.
I would say life. I've always had that innate ability to want to be a leader. So when I was younger, when I played sports is a huge part of my life. It taught me a lot of lessons that I wouldn't be able to learn other places. I was at my son's football practice yesterday, and he's only 8. And the coaches, I actually had to have a conversation with my son before he started. I said, hey, look, when you go out here, they're going to be yelling at you. Like, football is one of those sports. It's not like other sports. Like baseball, they don't really yell at you like that. Basketball, they don't really yell at you like that. Football, they're going to yell at you. Sure enough, they're out there yelling at us. So as I'm sitting out there watching, it's just funny because you got young kids out there, and these coaches are getting after them. So football taught me discipline. Playing quarterback taught me leadership. As a quarterback, when you won, everybody praised you, but when you lost, everybody cursed you. And so as a quarterback, I had to learn how to overcome that adversity. So sports taught me a lot about life. But then, I also was involved in ASB when I was in high school. I was a president of my ASB because I always wanted to run things and be an innovator.
Forgive me, what's ASB?
What is it? Student body? What's the A stand for? I don't know.
Like student government.
Yeah, you guys know. Somebody look it up. If you listen to this, look it up. But yeah, I think it's the Associated Student Body or something like that. But yeah, I was a president of our ASB, and then when I got older, I was always I had that hustler mentality. So life, I would say, taught me a lot of the leadership ability, but then getting into law enforcement, as a police officer, you have to be all things to all people, which is kind of what my book is about, is how do you become all things to all people? Like if I show up at your house and I don't know anything about you, you're probably going through one of your biggest, deepest, darkest despairs. And so how do I get on your level to help you navigate through that challenge? So law enforcement has taught me the ability to be able to negotiate with people, talk people off a ledge, how to empathize with people, even though you may not understand what they're going through. And then also how to have respect for people, even though they may not respect you.
What about high intense situations? Because it's interesting in business. I mean, we have intense situations, but not nearly to the level of what you experience in law enforcement. How do you drill? How do you practice? How do you train for that? Because, watching your videos, I'm like, when I watch them, I'm just so impressed. I'm like, damn, there's so much intentionality and things happen so fast. How can you be in a position to learn and train that so you can act on the fly?
So this is where I'm going to plug you and Bedros and a lot of things that you guys got going on, but putting yourself in stressful environments. I know that with the project that Bedros was running, I don't know if they're still running it or not, but like if you inoculate yourself to stress, what it does is it teaches you how to slow things down. We're not immune to adversity or trials. We're not immune to it. A lesson I learned from a good friend of mine, his name is Trevor Thrasher. Trevor used to be a Green Beret, and he would describe, like, when he was in combat, he experienced fear. I mean, Navy SEALs, Green Berets, all these guys, they experience fear. The only difference between them and you is that they've learned how to snap out of it faster than you do. It's the only difference. So it's not that they're not scared. They just know how to snap out of it. And they know how to think under pressure. So when you inoculate yourself to stressful situations, over time, what starts to happen is it's almost like you're operating in the matrix. It starts to slow down around you. That's why when you go into law enforcement, they have these stressful academies, which are yelling at you, they're cussing at you, they're doing all these different things to try to get you all wound up. And they want essentially to get you to be able to react and think under pressure. So if you're a business leader or a business owner, what are some things that you can do that you can almost essentially create stress and learn how to operate in that stressful environment? Some of the easy wins you can do is take yourself to another level in the gym the next time you're in there. Like push yourself beyond what you think you can go. And as you're pushing yourself, think through what you're doing. Think through decisions, or try to make critical decisions in the gym. Like try to think about a problem and try to solve it while you're working out super hard. Because now what starts to happen is your mind is trying to do a lot of things at one time. And what you'll start to realize is that as stressed as you are, you can still think. You can get yourself involved in programs like the project where they push you. And over time, it reminds me of playing football. Like when I first got to college and I started playing college football, it was fast. It felt like I was on a racetrack. But over time, when I start studying my playbook, when I start, practicing more, when I start getting into plays more, it starts slowing down around me. And so
even when you speak on stage, what I've learned as I continue to develop that skill set, when you get on stage for the first time and hundreds of people are looking at you, it just goes super fast. But then once you get more reps and sets underneath, the game slows down.
You hit your flow. Hit your flow, and then once you hit your flow, it's like, wow, like you literally feel like you're operating in the matrix, and you can't miss. It's like the other day when I was on the golf course, I couldn't miss.
By the way, your boy Michael Strahan was just talking some smack to you. I just saw, which is freaking awesome.
I owe him one.
Talk a little bit about that strategy in terms of leadership and actually breaking down barriers in terms of connection. You just told me an incredible strategy that you use playing golf and being able to build relationships there.
Yeah,
how has that served you?
There's so much value in proximity when it comes to success. This is what I mean. So we can study the books, we can get the doctorates, we can be the authors. All that stuff is great for your reputation, is great for your experience. But I think one of the most valuable assets that you can have is surrounding yourself with, one, a solid team, which you have around you. You have a phenomenal team around you.
So grateful.
But number two is surrounding yourself with other people that have success. One of the best ways that I learned to do that, and my dad did this for me when I was younger, is when I was 8 years old, my dad put me in golf lessons. And it wasn't because he wanted his son to be a PGA player. My dad recognized that on the golf course, deals get done. Business gets done on the golf course. And so if anything else, I want you to be able to hold your own on the golf course. And so I didn't really understand the true value of that until I got older. And when I got older, I always loved the game of golf. I loved the social aspect of it. I loved hanging out, but I also loved the competition of it, especially as I get older. I can't compete on the football field, so I need a place to compete. And that it kind of, hit a head recently when I was telling you when I met Michael Strahan. I met Strahan probably about 4 years ago. And he and I were working on a project, like a TV show. They basically greenlit, the president of ABC had greenlit a show that was inspired by my life, and Michael's company was going to be executive produce it. So he and I connected through that. We had talked briefly over the phone, seemed like a good guy. And it was actually funny because one of my dad's best friend actually coached him when he was at the Giants. And so it's a small world, but we didn't really, I didn't know him that well. And so he found out that I was a golfer, and he invited me out to go golf with him at one of the golf courses out here. And so when we went golfing, we just hit it off. We had a good time. He's the same guy you see on TV, the same guy you get in person, just a phenomenal guy.
Love that.
But the lesson I learned in that was, if I didn't golf, when would somebody of that stature give me 4 to 5 hours of undivided time just to hang out? If I would have asked him, hey, could we go out to dinner and I just want to pick your brain and talk to you, would you be able to do that? Well, guys like that are busy. They really have time for themselves. And so he would not give me 4 or 5 hours of undivided time. When I went to golf with him, because I was able to hold my own. So when I tell you this, if you want to take up what I'm saying, go do it. At least get a golf coach, somebody. You don't have to be a pro, but just be able to hold your own to where you're not slowing people up. But because I was able to hold my own, and when we went out there, one of the things he said, he was like, man, you were able to hold your own out here. And he wasn't talking about golf. He had invited one of the guys we played with at the time was the president of 20th Century Fox. I'm playing with some guys, and we were having a good time. We weren't talking business. We were just having fun.
Building a relationship.
Chopping it up, building relationships.
Which is the essence, from my perspective, leadership.
Correct, which is the essence of leadership. And so when we left there, it was one of those things he was like, you know what, I'll bring this guy around me more. And so over time, we start playing golf. And then next thing you know, that undivided time at sitting down at a restaurant that I would have never got, I get now because I was able to develop the relationship through golf. And so that's just one example. But what it shows is I have now seen and experienced things through relationships, not just a Strahan. I have so many other friends that have done and accomplished a lot of things that not only drive and inspire me, but it also allows me to realize that it's attainable. Bedros being one of them, you being another one. When you're around people that are running great organizations, great things, you start realizing why can't I achieve it? Why can't I do this? It's very, very possible. It's I remember when I was younger, to make $100,000 was oh my goodness, bro, you make $100,000? And now it's that's how I feel when it comes to $1 million. It's oh, okay. Back in the days, $1 million, you make $1 million. But now I'm man, why can't I make 5 million? Why can't I make 10 million? Why can't I make 50 million? Not to say that it's all generated or success is geared around money, but it's just, it breaks your threshold for what success truly looks like.
And it increases your vibrations, and it really kind of creates belief.
Correct.
And a lot of it is just if you believe you can do that, you'll run through a wall.
Absolutely.
So.
Absolutely.
All right. Next point on leadership, which I want to break down, is your transition out of law enforcement. So I was curious, how that came to be. Was there a pivotal moment, and how that transition was? Because, you had your identity there, and a lot of things about leadership is managing change, right? So what was that story? And how did that?
Great question. So number one is, and I've always told this to law enforcement, I didn't allow law enforcement to become my identity. Even though it was to the rest of the world, it appeared that law enforcement was my identity. Law enforcement was never my identity.
Was that a conscious decision?
That was a conscious decision.
Okay.
So number one, my identity's always been found in my relationship, number one, with God. 2, my identity's always been found in my relationship with my wife. What type of husband am I going to be to my wife? 3, my identity's always been found in what kind of father am I going to be to my kids? And number 4, my identity's always been found in what type of legacy am I going to leave for my community? And those have always been the 4 things that have shaped my identity, because those things will never change. You see, if I'm in law enforcement and I get hurt or I get injured or something comes up and that gets ripped away from me, then now I lose my identity, because my identity was rooted in those things.
Right.
So to start there, I think number one is your identity has to be rooted in something that's not going to change. And those things never change. That's what made it easier for me to make the transition out of law enforcement, as difficult as it was. You see, I was at a point in time where technically I'm still in law enforcement. So let me back up. I'm technically still in law enforcement. But when there was a point in time where I was traveling on the road all the time to go speak to organizations, different things, making really, really good money doing it. And then on my days that I wasn't speaking, I was at work working 40 hours a week. And so if I would have continued on that trajectory, I would have lost the things that make me who I am, my wife and my kids. So something had to change. And so I remember praying about it. And I again asked God, like, God, what do you want me to do? And he said, I want you to have faith, and I want you to step out on faith. And what's interesting is a lot of people say, well, I have faith. But it's one thing to have faith, but it's another thing to do faith. And everybody says
break that down.
Yes,
break that down.
I will. So everybody says I have faith.
Yeah.
But true faith is being able to do or to walk out not knowing what's going to come next. That's where most of us struggle. And when that was revealed to me, I sat there and I was thinking, like, man, I could easily have faith and say, okay, yeah, God, you'll work things out. But it was another thing to actually walk away from a job that was paying me $130,000 a year with full benefits, and my wife stays at home. You have to have faith. You have to do faith in order to do that, like to actually step out of it. So I said, I'm going to do it. I'm going to step out, and I'm going to literally put all my trust in you, because I literally have no backup plan. So I did that. Stepped out. 2 weeks later, when that check is supposed to hit on Thursday, it didn't hit because I walked away from it. My chief, I remember talking to my chief. I told my chief this is what I was going to do. I had actually had some ranks, so I was moving up in the ranks. I wanted to be the chief of police one day. And I told my chief, and my chief was like, man, Ryan, we all knew that this wasn't a matter of if, but when. And we all saw that you were on another trajectory. And so he was like, man, I can't afford to lose you. And I was like, well, what do you mean? He's like, well, you do something that's good for our department, man. You give our department a good reputation. You give the profession at whole a good reputation. And we value having you here. So he said, come back and see me in 2 weeks. So I came back and saw my chief 2 weeks after this conversation. And he said, man, have you ever heard of a part-time police officer? And I said, no. I said, what's that? He said, well, it didn't exist until today. He said, what I'm going to do is I'm going to allow you to be part-time, essentially, and you'll be able to keep your credentials. You'll be able to, just come and do your quarterly training and show up whenever you can show up. And that way you can focus on your business full time, but yet you can still be a police officer, and you can still have this as a backup plan, quote unquote. And when that happened, not only one, did I start to see what it was like to see what faith happens, like what it looks like when you just trust in God. But two, it shows what happens when you are a maverick in any industry. When you go out there and you create something that was needed the whole time, but nobody else was willing to do it. You see, I took so much heat from other officers in the profession about what I was doing. Everybody called me like a brown noser, this and that. But things change for you, and they go in your favor when you're willing to step out on faith and take chances. And so I took my chief up on that. 2 weeks later, I leave, and like I said, my account, my check didn't hit like it normally does, because now I'm a part-time. I only get paid if I work, and I didn't work, so I didn't get that money, and my account was negative. And I'll never forget the feeling. I was like, man, like, was this the right decision? Like, my account was negative. I had some money in savings, but my general account was negative. And that was the last time I really worried about money. And to be where I'm at now, to be able to do my business full time, to see it grow as rapidly as it has, it's been like an experience I can't even describe, but it shows what happens when you literally just trust in God, walk in faith, not by sight, and just go out there and do. Like Bible says, faith without works is dead. And so you have to actually go do your part. And I did my part. I've been grinding, and I'm still grinding, but I've never worried about money since. Now, it doesn't mean, though, I will say this, like being a CEO, and running a business, it comes with a new set of problems.
Oh, yeah.
Now it's can we match what we did last year?
Yep.
Can we continue to produce better than we did last year? What is the market? So there's a new set of worries, but nothing like, man, like, can we pay for this?
Good on you, man. Just fires me up. Faith, belief. I mean, these are all like mission critical in terms of leading yourself and leading an organization. So let's talk a little bit about Breaking Barriers United. Kind of tell the audience what it is, what the vision is, what you currently do, and what's the big mission behind it.
Yeah. So like I said, the mission at first was started at bridging the gap between law enforcement and the community. But as I've continued to evolve as a CEO and a business owner, I realized that it has to be, a little bit more broad. I mean, it's good to have a specific niche, but for what I do specifically, I think my expertise is more broad. Like right now, if you think about it, we are living in probably one of the most divisive times that we've ever experienced in our lifetime. With an election season going on, the left hates the right hates the left, racial wars. My expertise has been in becoming all things to all people. And so I have found that I'm going to morph my organization into how to learn how to resolve conflict with one another. You see, I truly believe that you and I, let's just say I think you and I are probably almost identical in our belief and our value system. But what I'm saying, but imagine if we were complete opposites. I still believe that we can have a great relationships and think differently. The problem is the world tells you otherwise.
Totally. I just love this so much because this is truth, and the world tells you opposite.
Yes, exactly. The world tells you if you feel a certain way that you can't be cool with me.
The other person's an enemy.
Exactly.
No, it's not the case.
And at the end of the day, we have to realize that most of the times, most of us want the same thing. We want to live good. We want to have thriving lives. We want to take care of each other. Like the essentials, the quintessential things we're all aligned with. But we've been so polarized by media that we live and feel like we can't coexist with each other. So now my organization is devoted towards resolving conflict by leading with love, empathy, and respect. If you love your brother, your sister, your cousin, whoever it is, like they're your own family member, then that's the first step. Number 2 is empathize with people. Empathize doesn't mean compromise. And I think people get that confused. People feel like, well, if I have to empathize with you, I got to compromise who I am. No, I'm not saying you compromise. All I'm saying is try to understand where that person is coming from. And you don't have to necessarily agree with it, but it'll give you a different perspective of why they might think the way they think. I mean, think about somebody who's grown up in the neighborhood, had all the odds stacked against them. They didn't have a family. They didn't have a dad in their life, didn't have a mom in their life. They grew up this way. Like, if you look at the odds that have been stacked against them and you start seeing why they think the way they think, it will give you a new perspective of why they're that way. It doesn't necessarily mean you're compromising and now you're thinking the way they think, but what it does is it gives you a new perspective to have a little bit more grace for them, and it allows that relationship to grow. And if you grow a relationship with that person, what you'll start to see is that person will essentially start to morph their value system because somebody had enough empathy for them to say, hey, you know what, I see things differently now.
Well, Ryan, that's why you're an incredible leader, because I'm the firm belief leadership is perspective and perspective is leadership.
Correct.
And when you continually seek perspective, we're just talking about it with your high school coach saying like, get out of here, meaning like go different, go experience something different, get new perspectives. When you do that, you can connect with someone, you can have a level of understanding, empathy to your point, and you can ultimately just work and live better together.
100%. That's like one of the most fundamental pieces of it is like, just connect with people. It's all about connection. And connection without compromise. And then the last thing is respect. And respect is one of those things that it's like, hey, I'm not going to respect you unless you respect me. But I'm a firm believer is like you give respect and you hope to get respect. Because like if you are hoping to get respect first from somebody, you guys will all be hoping forever. Yeah. But if you give respect, then, hopefully, it'll come back to you. Yeah. And when I spoke in a prison probably about 2 or 3 years ago, and when I went to the prison, all these guys were in there. I was speaking to the guys in the prison, and these guys that used to be incarcerated, they get up and they get the mic in their hand. And they're like, yo, 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 yo. Like, how many of you guys recognize the game isn't what you thought it was? And so I was kind of confused by the question at first. I was like, what is he talking about? And then he said it again. He's like, how many of you guys recognize the game isn't what you thought it was? So what he was asking was, in translation, how many of you guys recognize that the things that you did out on the streets wasn't worth what put you here? That's what he's asking. So in my mind, I'm thinking like, here's a negative cop coming out. I'm like, man, nobody's gonna raise their hand. Like, a lot of these people could care less about what they did. Every time I arrested people, they could care less. Like, they're like, I'll be out soon. Like, I'm not. A lot of them had pride about what they did.
Really?
So I wasn't expecting people to raise their hand when that question was asked. Man, blew me away. Everybody's hand went up in the air.
That's awesome.
So I'm like, wow, like they actually do care. Yeah. So after this is over, this one guy comes up to me. His name was Angel. I'm like, oh, what's up, Angel? How you doing? He's like, hey, man, Ryan, thanks for your talk today, man. Really inspired me, man. I really appreciate it. He's like, man, I want to start a podcast like you. I want to write a book like you. I want to do all these things. And in my mind, I'm thinking like, shoot, I didn't know you could do all that stuff in here, but okay. So finally, I worked up enough courage to ask him how long he's going to be in there. Because it does take a courageous thing to ask that, because you don't know what they're going to tell you. Like, they could tell you a year, they could tell you never. So he asked this question, or I asked the question, and he says, Ryan, I'm going to be in here for 142 years. So I'm like, you're going to be here for the rest of your life. So then I asked him, I said, Angel, how old are you? He says, I'm 22. I'm like, bro, you lost your whole life. I said, what did you do that put you in here? So then he goes through like, hey, I basically took the life of another person. I was involved in the gang. And because I was involved in the gang, they gave me more charges. And then that's what happened. So ultimately what it came down to was this. He said, Ryan, like, I didn't grow up with a dad in my life. I didn't have, my mom was there, but she wasn't there. And so the gang basically recruited me, and we would start to go and commit crimes because people weren't respecting the neighborhood. They didn't respect me. And what I realized is that I had insecurities that I didn't deal with. I had all these, I didn't know what it was like to be loved. I didn't know what it was like to be comforted and respected. And so I started reacting from a place of insecurities as opposed to realizing that, like, look, if I just learn how to respect myself, then I wouldn't even have done all these things. So this light bulb went off to me. I was like, dang, like, so you're basically telling me you're in here because you didn't respect yourself. And that's when I realized how powerful respect is. People take lives because of lack of respect. People will commit some of the most heinous crimes because of lack of respect. So if we boil it down to what true leadership looks like in the workplace, love your coworkers, love your peers like you would love any other family members, empathize with where they're coming from without having to compromise. You don't have to compromise, but just empathize and respect them. If you can if you can do those three things in your workplace, guarantee you'll see a different direction to your organization.
Oh yeah, man. I mean, easier said than done, but
100% is easier said than done.
That's why you're on the mission that you are.
Yeah, 100%.
So in this kind of very, divisive time, what's your vision for, the next step, like as you can continue to move through? Because it's a crazy time, Ryan, man. The last handful of years has been crazy. We're in election year right now. Like, what do you see over the next, 12, 24 months, and how are you going to be the solution?
Honestly, man, like, for the first time, I don't even have an answer for that. Like, I don't know what anybody thinks. If I'm being honest, I think we're in a lose-lose situation right now. And I'm a very optimistic guy.
I am too.
I'm very, very optimistic. I find the positive in everything. But what I mean when I say I think we're in a lose-lose is if Donald Trump wins the election, there's going to be a lot of people that hate the fact that he won the presidential election again, especially after these ridiculous charges. If Biden wins the election, there's going to be a lot of people that are going to go nuts because we don't know how this man is even still walking right now, if I'm being honest. So you have two groups of people that hate each other. And so no matter who wins, somebody's going to lose. And by whoever loses, we're all essentially going to lose because we're going to see this world up in arms. The only way we can save our country and our nation is we have to literally get back to just caring about each other and realizing that we all essentially want the same thing. We all want, like, I think it was Bill Maher or somebody said it best, and I'm not even a Bill Maher fan, but he said, like, look, like, I didn't leave, or I'm not leaving the Democratic Party. The Democratic Party is kind of leaving me. He said, look, like, I never changed. He said there was a time in politics where even though we might have saw things differently and we may have had different philosophies on how to get there, the Democratic Party and the Republican Party, we all wanted the same thing. We all wanted America to be great. Now everything is all about, I want the Republican Party to be great. I want the Democratic Party to be great. And it's no longer about moving this country forward. So if we really want to, like, be better, we have to start thinking about each other and moving each other forward regardless of how you might view things. Now, that's, again, easier said than done because some people's belief systems are just out of this freaking world. Yeah. You know what I mean? So we are up against some spiritual demonic forces. I will say that as well. Oh, shoot.
Amen to that. Speaking of Bill Maher, it's funny because I've historically never been a big fan, but I've been following him the last year and a half, 2 years, and he's speaking, in many ways, a lot of truth. One thing that I really like in essence of this podcast is free speech, and especially the last handful of years, there's cancel culture and this, that, and the other. Like, what's your thought on that, and especially bridging the gap between law enforcement, between just humanity in general? We'd love to get some insights there.
Man, people just need to grow a pair.
Please.
People just need to freaking grow a pair of nuts is what it comes down to. And this is what I mean. Like, you can't get offended when people say certain things about you. If they say something that you don't like, oh, well, who cares? What's the big deal? Like, not everybody's going to like you. You have to live in a world where you don't care what people think. What's funny is, I don't know if you watched this, but recently I watched the Tom Brady roast. Yeah. And it was hilarious, if you ask me. Totally. But the thing I loved about it is there was some very disrespectful stuff that was being said, but everybody just laughed it off. And I remember a time, including Tom. Yeah. And I remember a time in our country where we live, where if somebody told a joke or whatever, like, you just laugh it off. You say, well, you just go about your business. Nobody cared. We almost got to kind of get back to that. And I'm not saying that you just go out there and be disrespectful to everybody and you say whatever you want to say to people. But what I'm saying is like, don't be so sensitive about things, soft. When I talk to police officers all the time, I'm like, if somebody says something disrespectful about you, stop taking it personal. Usually it's not about you. Usually it's about the profession in and of itself.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So it's not about you. So I think, when it comes to this cancel culture stuff, like, I think part of going back to the success through proximity, part of it is I don't, if I have friends that think and value things differently than I do, I don't get all upset about it. Like I have a friend of mine, a really, really good friend of mine, who sees things completely differently than I do. Like, who they think should be president is completely different than who I think should be president. And we had a good discussion about this a couple weeks ago, but we walked away from the conversation still real cool with each other. And as a matter of fact, like, I was able to impart some stuff on him. He was able to impart some stuff about me, and we were cool. Like, because if you really think about the amount of issues that separates us, is nowhere near as many issues that bring us actually together.
And there's no way you can actually find common ground unless you have a platform to talk about stuff.
Correct.
And if you start putting cancel culture, number one, it's dangerous, first and foremost. And number two, it actually creates more divide and separation from my perspective.
Correct.
Because when you get down to it, when you connect with someone, you talk about things, you realize you're actually probably more aligned than not.
Correct. Anytime I point somebody to my Instagram page, I always give them this disclaimer. I always say, hey, look, when you go on my page,
I love it, man.
You're gonna be caught in a rabbit hole. Everybody calls it the rabbit hole because you watch one video, next thing you know, you just start watching a whole bunch of videos.
Amen.
So you'll get caught up in the rabbit hole, but just realize, as you watch my videos, you're not gonna agree with everything I have to say, but that's okay. Just realize that I'm still the same Ryan, and I just think a little bit differently than you. I may think a little bit differently than you, but you're also going to find out that I'm probably able to educate you on some things, and you're also going to find out that we probably have more similarities than we have non-similarities. And so when I tell them that, they'll come back later and like, dang, Ryan, like, you're right. Like, I don't agree with everything you say, but man, you put out some stuff that I'm just like, man, like, how could I dispute that? And so I say that's what makes us great as people, is like, if I look at my marriage, me and my wife, we are very different in many ways, but our differences is what makes us great. Like, because she dots every I and crosses every T, and I'm terrible at that, we complement each other. You know what I mean? Because I'm vocal and she doesn't like to be vocal, we complement each other. So it's like two gears that are rolling. Like, if the two gears are on the same track, they're not going to work. But when they're on opposite tracks, they flow together. So stop being worried about differences and stop trying to counsel people if they don't view things the way you do.
Amen to that. Also, too, what I've learned is, sometimes when I hear something I don't like, okay, it's like stings me, but then I like start thinking about it, and whether I come around or not, it actually just gives me a different perspective. We're talking about that as well.
Yeah.
So, man, kindred spirits, dude.
Man, that's what it comes down to, man. That's what it comes down to.
All right, my friend, you've been so gracious with your time. We got a few more minutes for the bonus round before we wrap up, if that works for you.
I'm good with it. Let's do it.
All right, we talked a little bit about leadership. You are a freaking leader, bro. What does leadership mean to you?
Man, good question. I think leadership to me just means you are willing to be selfless. Like, leadership to me is putting others before yourself. You look at any really good leaders, they're always thinking about everybody else before themselves. And I could give you example after example. I have a friend of mine. He went to the Chick-fil-A headquarters years ago. As he's sitting in the cafeteria, some guy comes and sits down with him. They start having a conversation. They're eating Chick-fil-A. The guy gets up, he grabs his tray. He grabs my buddy's tray, gets all of his trash. And my buddy's like, no, I got it. He's like, no, let me do it. Let me take your stuff. He goes, gets rid of all the trash and stuff like that. And then they continue to walk. Well, later on, my buddy finds out that guy that grabbed all of his trash was one of the presidents of the company. And so that right there is not only somebody that doesn't have to do that, but somebody that's doing it because he realizes that, how am I supposed to lead if I'm not leading by example? So I think you have to be selfless, put others before yourself. One of the things I just recently did was, I speak a lot, and I was speaking in a school a couple weeks ago, and I was talking to some kids in an urban city in New Jersey. And one of the things I brought up to them, I said, there's two numbers that are on this slide. I think the numbers were 258 and 505. And I said, both of these numbers either directly or indirectly impact you. And the kids didn't know what the numbers were. So I went further and I said, well, the number 258 is the average amount of homicides that occur in your state every single year. And I said, the number 505 is the average amount of shootings that occur in your state every single year. And I said, these numbers directly or indirectly impact you because you either have a family member or a friend that was actually killed or shot in one of these crimes. And then I said, and to take it a step further, the way I know that they directly or indirectly impact you is most of these crimes that have been committed are all done and committed by Black and brown people. So I said, and most of my audience was Black and brown kids. So then I went on to say, what's sad is when I walked into this auditorium that I was in, they had all these signs that said Black Lives Matter, or all lives will never matter until Black Lives Matter. Like, they had all these signs of everywhere that said that. I said, what's crazy to me is I said that I walk in here, I see these signs, and yet if a white police officer shot a black guy outside right now, all of you guys would be outside protesting right now. Every single one of you guys would. But yet you guys kill each other every single day and nobody says a word. Then you go to the funeral and you wear that person's shirt or their face on your shirt and it says RIP such and such, you all cry and stuff like that. And then after that funeral is over, you take that shirt off and it goes in the back of the closet, never to come out again. And that's the legacy you guys want to lead. And so I said, the thing that's preventing you guys from stepping up and standing out as true leaders is fear. Fear of what people might think if you get punked. Fear of what people might think if you don't step up and stand up for yourself. Fear of what people might think if you stand up while everybody else is sitting down. The fear is what's going to prevent you guys from being leaders. And so I equate it to going skydiving. You know, the first time you go skydiving, you know, when you show up to the airplane and when you go, like, your heart is beating out of your chest. It's like, man, man, this is scary. And then you start to climb, you start to go higher and higher and higher. You're like, man, this is freaking scary. Like, man, we're getting high. And then finally you get maximum altitude where you're going to jump 15,000 feet. You're looking out the window. You're like, man, we are super high above ground. And you see this light in the airplane that goes from red to green, which means it's time to jump. And so finally you scoot forward, and at the very last minute you look over and you're like, man, I don't know if I can do this, man. I can die doing this. And finally you fall out of the plane. And the moment you fall out of that plane is the moment all that fear leaves you and you're having the time of your life. You see, the fear that you experience from the plane is always more intimidating than the jump itself. And sometimes you just need to jump. And so I gave that example to those kids, and I got hit up the next day. And I had never been skydiving to this point. I was only sharing this story from a friend of mine who goes skydiving all the time, Redman. He's a rapper. And Redman says, hey, Ryan, I'm going skydiving tomorrow. You're coming.
Let's go.
And I'm like, wait, what? I was like, oh man, I don't know if I'm ready for that. And the moment he told me, I didn't even commit to him yet. My heart started beating out of my chest. And so I was like, you know, how am I going to talk about it and not be about it? You see, as leaders, you can't just talk about things. You got to be about it. So I said, all right, let's do it. So I showed up, and all that fear I just described is what I experienced this day with Redman. And once I jumped out of that plane, I had the time of my life doing a straight free fall, 120 miles an hour down towards the ground, and having the time of my life, and all that fear had left me. And I was able to walk back into the schools and saying, look, I'm not just talking about it, I'm being about it. So if you want to be a true leader, not only do you have to be selfless and think about others before yourself, but you can't just talk about it, you got to be about it.
Dude, man, you fire me up so much. I mean, literally what you just laid down was gold, first and foremost. So true, speaking facts. The thing that I thought about from a leadership perspective, which you just laid that down so well, was the other side of fear is courage. So Ryan, from your perspective, where does that courage come from to speak the truth? Because, you know, I watch your page, you have an awesome following. You speak the freaking truth, bro. And there's sometimes you get hate as well. And ultimately you have to have courage to be able to speak that truth. Where does that come from?
So they complement each other. Fear and courage complement each other. And this is what I mean. So you have the fear on one side, you have fear, no doubt about it. But the courage is that you have to realize that it's never as bad as you think it is. And that's where you gain the courage to just do whatever you need to do. I realize, if you think about it, when you jump out of a plane, is it possible that you can die? Absolutely. Is it probable? No. If I make a post that somebody may not like, is it possible that somebody could cancel me? Yes. Is it probable? No. So it's a pure math equation. If you look at the equation of it, a lot of times we operate with fear in possibilities. But what we need to learn to do is we need to operate more with probabilities. And when you operate from a place of probability, meaning like the odds of this going in your favor are more likely than not, then it gives you the courage that you need to take the step. So get away from possibility and thrive in probability.
Dude, love that. Going back to unity versus segregation. One of the things I just loved about your previous answer was when you were, talking to the kids, what you did is you showed facts, you showed data, you showed truth, but you also brought everyone together by basically showing like, hey, this isn't like an outside issue. Like you have someone in your family and your friends that were connected by this. Going back, segregation, bringing to unity, which I believe what a leader does. So how would you describe from your lens the difference between those two?
Yeah, I think the difference is like we have to, number one, get out of the vortex. The vortex is what everybody else tells you, what everybody else tells you your truth is. As a black man, like society from a systematic standpoint, systematically people have told me that I can't. Systematically people told me that you're a victim. Systematically people have told me that you shouldn't be doing this. And so when you step out of the vortex and when you start to critically think for yourself and personalize, like, okay, what does this mean to me? Not everybody else, but to me.
You.
To me.
Yes.
Then you start to realize that, oh, wow, like, no, there are possibilities. There are possibilities. So anytime I try to bridge divides, I always say, get away from everybody else and let's talk about you. Let's talk about your family. Let's talk about your household. You see, a lot of these people will say, oh, well, I want everybody to just love each other. Okay, that's great. We're talking about everybody else. But what do you want in your household? How do you want people to feel in your household? Are these things that you want to accept out here? Are these things that you would accept in your household? Well, no. So then why are you accepting it on a broader scale? Well, because I'm afraid of what people might think. Well, again, getting back to possibilities and probabilities, it's possible that people could counsel you. Yeah. But the probability that more people are going to think like you and understand like you and empathize with you are more likely than not. So I always try to make things more personable to that person's experience as opposed to operating in this vortex, which is what a lot of us are living in and we can't get out of.
Love that. Last couple questions here, my buddy. This show is dedicated to teach leadership, promote capitalism, defend free speech. When you break it down, freedom is my core value. I'm looking at a guy right now who's free. He's been told he can't do this, can't do that, but here you are sitting at the table, making a big impact, uniting people, living a free life, and actually teaching freedom to other people. What's your relationship with freedom?
Oh, man. Freedom is, people don't understand how good we got it. I still believe, even like I said earlier, even if it's a lose-lose situation in the United States of America, it's still a win-win to the rest of the world. Like you're in a win-win situation living in the United States of America because you have the freedom to go out there and accomplish whatever you want, whenever you want. And so freedom to me means that you don't want to limit the ability that you've been given and gifted. Every single one of us has been gifted. Whether you want to acknowledge it or not, every single one of you has been given a gift. And the problem is again, going back to the Bible and stuff like that, like there's all these analogies that talks about the talents. And I always like the one of my favorite analogies of the Bible is when he talks about the man with the talents. He gives 3 different men talents. He gives one guy 1 talent. He gives another guy, 2 talents. And don't butcher me don't crucify me if I don't get this exactly right, but I'm gonna sum it up. And he gives another guy 3 talents. The guy that gives the talents out, he goes away and he comes back. And the guy that has the 3 talents, he gives the guy back the talents. He says, hey, look, I took your 3 talents and I made, 10 talents. Then he comes back to the second guy, and the guy that had 2 talents, he says, hey, man, I took your 2 talents and I made another 5 talents. And then the guy, he goes to the guy that he gave the last talent, and he says, hey, look, I took the talent, I buried it, so that way I can save it for you when you come back, and here's your 1 talent back. And the guy says, hey, look, you're basically cast off into utter darkness and stuff like that because you basically wasted away the talent that was given to you. You were lazy, all this other stuff. So when I read that analogy, I read it as this. I'm like, man, I was given a gift, and it's my responsibility to go make more of that gift. So if when the owner comes back, when God comes back, or whoever, like I want to be able to say, hey, God, like I did it, man. I want him to say, well done, good job. In football terms, man, you left it all on the field. So how many of you guys are going to die leaving the potential that you had all on the table because you were so fearful of what you could do and you couldn't move in courage to get it done? So when I talk about freedom, you have the freedom to fail. Failure is a good thing. Failure is not a bad thing.
Yes.
You have the freedom to fail. And when I had to make that decision to leave the police department, it came down to this. When I talk about doing faith, it came down to this decision. I said, I can, work a long career in law enforcement, retire after 30 years, and die saying, man, what if I would have just made that move? What would have happened? Or I can leave, and best case scenario, I look back and say, man, I'm so glad I freaking did that. Worst case scenario, I can say, man, at least I tried. It's the worst you can happen. So we all have a responsibility to take advantage of the freedoms that we have here that we don't have other places, and utilize the talent that you've been gifted to go and make more of it.
Dude, love that. And what I love about freedom, you just said it, responsibility. On the other side of freedom is responsibility, man. And it's just, that lights me up. We are kindred spirits, and I appreciate that, my friend.
Yeah, no worries, man.
All right, Ryan, as we bring it down, the name of this show is the CEO Show, the Chief Executive Officer Show. You are a CEO. From your perspective, what does a CEO mean to you?
For me, a boss. No, but if I'm being real, like a CEO, means that you have traits that others don't have. I wish I could sit here and say that everybody is capable of being a CEO, but the reality is you're not. Not everybody's capable of being a CEO. You see, CEOs, it's like being the quarterback of a football team. You know, when you are winning, everybody freaking loves you.
You're the hero.
Including yourself. You look in the mirror, you're like, damn, you look good. But when you fail hard, and everybody crucifies and curses you.
You're the GOAT.
Yeah, exactly. So not everybody can be the quarterback of a football team. There's only one. Not everybody can be the CEO. And so what I would say a CEO means is that CEO is one, a gift, but two, CEO means that you have the ability to lead from the front and change a culture. You have the ability to leave a legacy. Not to say that you can't leave a legacy as a janitor, because you could obviously leave a legacy as a janitor, but you have the ability to not only leave a legacy for yourself, but help other people leave their own legacies. And so going back to responsibility, I feel like being the CEO comes with responsibility, and what it means is synonymous with being with responsibility. Like, you have a lot of responsibility. Don't waste it, but you're going to be gifted. And if you do it right, you're gonna have experiences that everybody else is gonna want. Everybody else is gonna say, "Man, why can't I do that? Why can't I do that?" Well, they weren't willing to take the risk that you were willing to take. So don't ever forget where you come from. You know, remember your roots. Remember your humble beginnings. That's always number one. I always remember where I come from. I never want to be big time. I mean, it's funny. I travel all the time now, and I get people that walk up to me in the airport all the time, man, like, "Oh man, I listen to your stuff. I follow your stuff. It's crazy. It's like surreal." Like, my kids freaking geek out every time they see it, and I always want to make sure I always have time for those people. I always want to make sure, like, there's been times where I'll travel and people will come out just to see me, even though, like, they weren't coming out for the event. They just come see me. Yeah. And we'll go to Topgolf or something like that. And they're like, "Man, like, you're willing to do that?" It's because I remember when I was that guy that just wanted a few minutes of somebody else's time. So don't ever be that guy that gets so high on your high horse that you don't have time for the people that actually put you in the position that you're in.
Ryan Tillman, you are an exceptional leader, my friend. Mic drop moment. I am so grateful for you being on the show. I'm going to wrap it up with an acknowledgement before I do. In the case that our audience here hasn't connected with you, inspired, it's like, dude, I want more Ryan Tillman in my life. How can they find you?
Man, you can go to breakingbarriersunited.com, all one word, Breaking Barriers United. You can follow me on all my different platforms, Instagram, TikTok, YouTube. Breaking Barriers United is all the same. And if you guys want, check out my book. I do have a book called Happy Eyes, Becoming All Things to All People, which I forgot to bring today, but I'll bring it to you tomorrow. And with that being said, yeah, that's where you can follow me at.
My brother. Well, before we shoot today, first I want to acknowledge you. Thank you for being here. It's been a long time coming, but way more than that, my friend. Dude, thank you for being who you are, for being a freaking awesome leader, for being a servant leader, for speaking your mind, for having courage, for bringing people together in a time right now we're so divided, there's so much segregation. When I followed your channel, when I connected with you first time, I was like, dude, this guy literally has the same fiber, same fabric, and bringing people together from a leadership perspective, which I have so much respect for. So I want to acknowledge and thank you, my friend.
Bryce, thank you, brother. You are leading from the front, brother. Seriously, you're leading from the front. You're impacting so many different lives. You don't even realize it. And you've impacted my life. And so I just thank you for having me on today.
My brother. Well, thank you.
Take care.
Friends, I know you got a ton of value, assuming you did too, Ask. Go ahead and like this and share this with someone who needs more inspiration, needs more leadership, needs more unity in their life. That would help me, help the channel, and I really appreciate that. Before we wrap out, I want to give you one more reminder. Adversity is your advantage. And my friends, we'll see you in the next episode.